Good evening, and welcome to another incisive version of Diatribes from the Voice of Doom. Now here's your incorrigible and invective host, Voice of Doom. Hello. Alright, I thought I'd do another diatribe. It's Monday, October 21st, exactly 15 days until the so-called election. And just to make sure that I got my 2 cents in before the conflagration, I have this to show you. And in case you're thinking I might have gotten that off my desk from another election, here is my receipt, showing the date and everything else that I voted. And it was all right. It was fast, Carson City, and there was a big crowd, and they were saying that there has been big crowds ever since early voting started. And I'd have to make a guess that probably 75% of Carson City are going to vote for Orangey. So let's hope those tabulations reach their proper destination in the proper quantity. But Carson City's pretty red. Speaking of red, I was at work the other day. A couple comes in. Yeah, about a little older than me, not too much. We're all kind of in the same age bracket, but tends to be a big difference between somebody who's 72 and somebody who's 65. It's just the way the chips fell for certain people, and I'm not envious, and I'm not blaming anybody but myself for not making the proper investments and the proper planning and discipline to have a retirement. But they're always talking about their latest trip to Australia, or the cabin that they bought down at Mammoth or something like that. And it's annoying. But most of the people that sit at my bar know me, and they know where I'm coming from, and we usually start talking about current events. And I said, this is a pretty red area in Minden. And I started talking about something, and I said, we're pretty much all on the same page. And they go, yeah, we're on the same page. And so I proceeded to make some jokes about Walls. And I think I said, did you see the debate with Walls when he said that Trump didn't keep his promise of building the wall, and he thought that was just awful. I thought that was pretty ironic, and they said, oh, you mean Vance? And suddenly I'm thinking, wait a minute. And eventually I got to I said, the man said the wife is, canvassing for Gargoyle. And I had already called her Gargoyle at that point, so there was no point in trying to pretend. And I said, oh, you mean you're kind of split up? Split votes? And they go, no, we're Blues. Now, I always had fantasies about what I would do or say if Blues came to my bar, and I was very nice because that's my job. And I said, I gotta hand it to you. If you're canvassing this area for Gargoyle, then I got to give you some credit for that. And I asked her, how do you know which houses to go to where you're not going to get shooed away or whatever. And she said, well, they have a roster and a list of people that are listed as independent and or undecided. I'm like, oh, okay. I wish I had said Um, well, I'm not really sure. I think orangey might be a little too narcissistic for me. Give me one good reason I should vote for Gargoyle without using the word Trump, Donald, or Orange. But I didn't think to ask that. And then in retrospect, I realized if I ask that, it's just even asking that question may provoke animosity or hostility. But we had a good conversation at the end of the night when they left. I said, you see, we can disagree and still have a respectful conversation. And they agreed, and we left on good terms. But it's just astounding to me. I could have really gone into it with them about how in the world could you possibly be well, anybody but orangey, anybody. So whatever, that's their thing. I've explained to everybody why. So that was my little adventure. Went to vote today, and I went to the Republican tent and got their recommendations, because I don't really pay attention much to the city council or superintendents or whatever the hell. So I just figured I'd go along with pretty much their side of it. I should have been more careful. I had to redo my voting because in the propositions they just recommended no on everything, which I tend to do because most propositions are duplicitous and boondoggles. They're never what they say they are. They call it something nice like clean beaches and parks, and it turns out to be money to take land by eminent domain. I know that for a fact. So I tend to vote no on everything. And I looked at it carefully, and it's like one of them was like, do you support voter ID? And I had voted no, so I went back and amended that to yes, because there's no reason on earth that you shouldn't have voter ID to vote, and it would make it much easier. Now, there's way easier ways to have a voting system in order for it to be accurate, but that's the last thing that they want in this so-called country. They do not want an easy and efficient way to vote. They want a convoluted and ridiculous way to vote. So you can vote by mail, vote by absentee, vote by carrier pigeon, vote by, semaphore or smoke signals in order to obfuscate the results. Okay, we all know that these are going to cheat their asses off. But I had to amend that. And I just sent it in, and then I realized I had voted that we should outlaw abortion in Nevada, which is not my stance, but it's not binding. They're not going to change the law from a proposition. They're just getting the tone, the tenor of the state. Okay, so, and I got no dog in that fight. You know how I feel about abortion. You should be able to abort your kid as long as you're alive. And that would keep them in line. But let's go on. A few things about the Bear interview that I have to take issue with. I think he wasted a hell of a lot of time, precious time, knowing she's going to run out the clock as much as she can, talking about transgender surgery for prisoners. Now, of course, that's absurd. Fellini would say, no, I'm not going to do a movie about this because it's too ridiculous. But that was his main thing, and she was hemming and hawing, and, I'll follow the law, or whatever. I mean, maybe they should all get sex changes. If you're in prison, we're going to have your genitals removed. That would probably cut down on crime. Just a guess. Now, leaving that subject, I'm going to go to the burger wars and lay this to rest. I don't understand. These people are journalists. They make millions of dollars. There's politicos that make at least hundreds of thousands of dollars, aides and advisors, and they don't know the stupidest little things. Okay, I worked at McDonald's when I was a kid. I know what it's like to be an ordinary person. Well, there's no evidence that she ever worked at McDonald's. Well, I say I did, so I did. So they're going back and forth with the media about, who should prove what. It's ridiculous at the outset. Now, I understand. If you lie about little things, you'll lie about big things. So, on one hand, you could say maybe she worked at Jack in the Box and she forgot. Well, whatever. Shouldn't be a big deal. But they're making a big deal out of it. And Orangey goes to a McDonald's and he works the fry machine. And he hands bags to people with food. And he's talking and everybody knows it's brilliant. It's not like we think he's an ordinary person because he worked at McDonald's. It's just he is willing to take a few minutes out of his day and just be with the common herd. So, I don't understand why there's an issue here. Now, Gargoyle says she worked at McDonald's in 1982. The opposition say there's no evidence that she worked at McDonald's in 1982. And then I hear some stupid things. Oh, it was 1982. They didn't have W-2s back then. They didn't keep records at McDonald's back then. It was all done, chiseled in, tablets, papyrus scrolls. Because 1982 was the Dark Ages, and they didn't keep records back then. Now, shall I say this now and put it all to bed? Every year I get a letter from the Social Security office, and it lists my income going back to 1974 when I first started working, and it has my income for every single year since 1974. Now, if Social Security has my income, then I'm sure it has my work history. It has the record of my W-2s that I filled out over the decades. Now, I'm not saying that Orangey's team can go to Social Security and find out, because it's probably confidential. But I think that Gargoyle could. She could go to Social Security and get copies of her W-2s going back throughout her entire career, and I'm sure they would give it to her. And knowing her status, they would probably do it very quickly. It'll be in the mail, and you'll get it in about 40 weeks. No, she could get it really fast. So, by my reckoning, being a modern-day Sherlock Holmes, Gargoyle did not work at McDonald's. Because if she did, she would prove it, and then she would prove Orangey to be the biggest liar, fascist, totalitarian despot that ever walked this earth. And that would be the end of the election. Now, Gargoyle is an idiot, and we all know this, but in this day and age, idiots have a very good chance of winning the presidency, as we've seen. But in this day and age, candidates can say things and do things that 40 years ago would have been campaign enders. And I refer you, of course, to Gargoyle's brilliant move of some people in her rally saying Jesus is Lord, and her saying, "You're at the wrong rally, you belong at the small one outside." In any other election in history of what used to be this country, that would be a campaign ender. It would end it right there and there, right then and there. But she can get away with it because she's a D, and because we've slouched to Gomorrah. We are no longer slouching toward Gomorrah, we are in Gomorrah. It's a godless, sin-infested, blood-soaked, used to be country. So I made a few good points there. I think that everyone can learn from me, but they won't be watching this, so that's just too bad for them. Oh, and by the way, I did vote early because I'm still convinced they're not going to have a general election on November 5th, and I don't know what they're going to do. But when most of the major cities are either underwater or smoldering pits, or people are hiding in their house because there's a pandemic, or if there's an EMP or a CME or anything that they can concoct, will they just count the votes that are already in? Or will they just say we can't do that? It's a good question, and it remains to be seen, but we'll still see if we make it till November 5th. I don't see how we can. So we'll leave it there. I'll talk more about this later, and have a good evening. Good night.